Development will now come to order. We're going to take items out of order today, some of them. We're going to begin with the item number 5.
John White, City Clerk. Item 5, Fire Department reports relative to the Department's Fire Explorer and Youth Development programs and the First Responder Street Survival Safety Training Program for Battalion 13 staff.
Okay. Before we bring people forward, I just want to make an announcement to the committee. Every committee of the City of Los Angeles has a staff person who's assigned by their council member to be the lead and point person. Eduardo Hewitt is the person who's been working on these matters on behalf of my office and working with every single one of you on these matters in detail, not just in committee but outside of committee. And I just wanted to let you know, those of you who know Eduardo and know about his situation that he's been going through with his family. We just got notified that his mother passed away. So, as you can imagine, it's a very difficult time for many of us. Eduardo certainly could use your support, especially those of you who are friends with him and colleagues. So I know my prayers are with him, and if there's anything that I can do, we will do for him in this difficult time. So again, Eduardo Hewitt's mother passed away this morning, and for those of you who can be there for him, I just want to let you know. Item number 5, presentation on item number 5 from the department regarding the Fire Explorer Youth Development Programs. Okay. Is there anybody here from the department who is here to speak on item number 5 from the fire department? I know that we have a lot of Aztec men and women here, and we do have only one comment card filled out for item number 5. William Cervera. Okay, come forward. Yes.
I'm here with the fire crew. I'm actually working.
I'm sorry, your name and your position?
Sorry, my name is William Cervera. I work with the United States Forest Service. I work as a firefighter on an engine, as well as also different hand crews. I'm also the trainer for the Aztec Fire Program. Came through it, and came through the program, got hired a full-time position, and I've come back to give training to the gentlemen that are here before us. Last year, they had the Griffith Park fire. Sorry, little. They had the Griffith Park fire, and since we're a city program, we want to see if we could be utilized a little bit more for the city. Right now, we're working with Mitch O'Farrell doing the Elysian Park program, doing brush clearance, clearing the ladder fuels. Also, with this fire crew, we have a lot of people that were in gangs and giving them an opportunity. They went to the Dodger Job Fair, and every single job that they went to, they were not going to be able to get a job because of their past. With the Aztec Fire Crew, they're actually going to be able to have an option to turn their life around and be able to have some self-worth and motivation. We're going to be working on the LA River next, where we're also getting rid of some of the encampments, so helping out for the public safety. I understand that it's also difficult for the funding, but these gentlemen are actually having the opportunity to be getting their training and certified as a red card from the U.S. Forest Service. But it'd be, they're getting job skills, and they're going to be ready to be coming out. The one thing I found very important with this fire crew is we have people from different gangs, whether it be 18th Street, Evergreen, Tunerville, and every one of them are able to take a lunch next to each other, and they forget about their gang past. and they're actually sharing food with each other. Opposing gangs actually being able to do this. They're being out there and they're learning how to do public information when we were doing the job fair. So hopefully we would be able to be implemented from the city.
Okay, you're not on timer, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
You've now been designated as the person to answer the questions on behalf of the program. When you mentioned earlier about some of these young people applying for jobs, and because of their past, they either don't get the job or
Some of them have not been able to get any jobs, so they lose their licenses.
but what do you mean by the past?
Some of the people in the past have been in gangs. They've had a bad upbringing.
Or they have a criminal record, juvenile or otherwise,
Yes, sir.
and then because of the application, they're required to put that information down, and it appears that because of that, they don't get to, I guess, the next level of being interviewed or offered a job?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. They
Okay.
actually were let known that since they have a criminal background, that they will not even accept the application.
That was against the law in California. No?
I'm not sure.
Should be. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll spare you some of the questions from the department, but what I do want to understand is the people who go through the training. Oh, you said something about losing a license. What did you mean by that?
Some of the people that cannot obtain jobs, and if they have child support, they're not able to have a job, so they will take away their license, so they're not able to
What
travel far.
license?
A driver's license.
Oh, driver's
Sorry,
license. Okay.
apologize.
All right.
They lose their driver's license, and unless they have a steady job, they will not give them back their driver's license. So even working with the United States Forest Service, we do give them that option. The only three things that will not hire them is if they're murder, rape, or arson, but they have to have a license to be able to drive out there. So getting a job like this and keeping them busy keeps them off the streets, keeps them staying away from the gang activity, but also at the same time to give them job skills so when they go to the U.S. Forest Service, so they're able to get their driver's license back.
Now, I need you to clarify the correlation between somebody having a driver's license and not having a job and losing their. I know a lot of people who are lazy and don't have jobs. I'm not saying you are, but it's a choose not to work, sit on the couch all day, but nobody takes their driver's license away. So what do you mean by that?
I believe, I'm not sure the law's name, the new law that passed, if they're behind on child support because they couldn't have a job,
Oh, okay.
they pull their license.
Okay, yeah.
And unless they have a job, so they could start paying the child support, they're
Okay.
not able to keep it.
So it has nothing to do with their record. It has to do with those individuals who have child support.
Well,
And
they're economic, I mean.
yeah, but what I'm saying is, you're describing those individuals who go through the program, who want to get a job, and when they don't get a job, that interferes with their ability to pay child support, and then they lose their driver's license, and then because they lose their driver's license, it makes it harder for them to either go look for a job or actually get a job across town, for example, and actually make it to and from work, because now they can't legally drive.
Yes.
Okay. So you're describing one of the complications, which is appropriate, about how things are connected and how individuals, it's more complicated than on the surface.
Yes, sir.
One thing relates to another. Now, is this program specifically for people who are at risk of becoming gang members, or does this actually serve people who have been gang members or may currently be a gang member who want to get out of a gang, and then they can actually join this to try to get on the right path? Who does it target? Who does it serve?
It's all the above.
All of the above.
Yes, sir. Some of the gentlemen that are in here, they live in an area where they're at risk, so we're helping them stay away from it. Some of the gentlemen that are sitting here have also been in a gang, and they're trying to stay away from it, trying to stay busy, where they're working so hard during the day, and by the time they get home, they already know they have to get the uniform ready for the following day, so they don't have time to do anything else except for get ready for work, train. I give them some training, so they'll be certified. Currently,
Certified for what?
the United States Forest Service. We actually take them to an academy, and they get trained to become wildland firefighters. So like the San Diego fires, the Malibu fires, they get deployed to that, and they're able to get jobs.
Some of the actual Aztecs actually have fought fires that we saw on TV?
Yes, sir. I was on them. I actually came from the Aztec program. We went to several. We went to the Day Fire. After that, they went to different fires. They also went to in Idaho. It's called the Rattlesnake Complex. There's a lot of fires that they get deployed out to. They could get deployed to anywhere in the United States.
So what's a hotshot crew?
A hotshot crew is normally an 18-man crew that has to have different
Men or women?
requirements. Men or women.
Okay.
And we have actually about 7 women that are at risk or were in gangs. And they have to have chainsaws, they have to have certain people that are supervisory roles, and they have to cut so many lines. That's what makes them. A line is, example, 66 feet is considered a chain. So they have to be allowed to cut X amount of chains per hour, and it's roughly about 40 chains per hour. So that's between falling trees, moving any type of fuel out of the way. So this is a type 2 crew, so they're held to a standard of 35 chains per hour.
Okay. So a hotshot crew is like the Navy SEALs of firefighters?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And have any Aztecs made it to be on hotshot crews?
Yes, sir, several. We actually have one of the gentlemen that did a detail for a year. His name is Alfredo Delgado. He actually was on the Texas Canyon Hotshots. He
Okay.
came back just to give back to the crew like I do. I come back during my winters and I give back as much as I can since I got so much out of it.
Okay. Who's Alfredo? Can you come forward, please? Can you state your name for the record?
My name is Alfredo Delgado.
Okay. And where are you at as far as this process? What part of the process are you in?
Right now, in the process, I got hired with the Aztecs
You can
Rising.
pull the mic closer to you. Go ahead.
I got hired with the Aztecs Rising, helping the guys training and extra same as Will, just training.
Okay. How long ago?
This is my first year, helping them out.
Well, when was the first day you actually stepped foot into the program?
I was in 2005.
2005.
That's when I started. Started as a Type 2 crew with the Aztecs Fire crew. From there, I got experience. I got picked up as a Texas Canyon Hotshot with the U.S. Forest Services. I wasn't full employed. I was seasonal. From there, I went to different fires all over the U.S. I came back, and I was actually going to join another crew, I guess, in San Bernardino. But I stood, and then they offered me a job as a recruiter and trainee.
Okay. Now, how did you hear about the program?
Neighbor.
What's that?
From a neighbor,
From a neighbor. So word of mouth, a friend.
a friend.
Okay. And then what did you do to get in the program?
I never knew about the program, so I just jumped in there. I went, I got interviewed, and I started right away.
Okay. So you found out where it was, where you applied, you got interviewed, and then they accepted you, and then they put you in the program?
Yes.
How many weeks of training did you go through?
About 3 months.
About 3 months. Uh-huh. And in those 3 months, did you fight any fires, real fires? I know they have. They
it's
set
3 months.
fires on purpose to give you practice, but real fires.
Sometimes real fires, yes. We caught one in the Lake Pyramid. Lake Fire's up, and it's going towards like Santa Clarita by Six Flags. There's a fire over there, so that was my first fire.
Mm-hmm. And is it easy work, hard work? Are you yawning when you're working? What's
It's
up?
hard work. You gotta be disciplined. You gotta be mentally and good physical condition.
Okay. If you weren't in this program, could you give us an idea where you guess you would be or what you might be doing with your time if you hadn't been in this program and offered a job, etc.?
I probably would have been just on the streets, looking for other jobs,
Mm-hmm.
just unemployed.
So somebody being on the street looking for a job, not being able to get a job, and being bored, is that a good thing or a bad thing for youth who have a lot of energy?
It's actually this type of job is actually good, because
No, hold on. I asked you, we're going backwards here. I'm asking you your opinion. If there's a young person like you were when you started, had you not gotten this program, someone like you, and you were looking for jobs in the neighborhood you lived in, and you weren't getting jobs, and you had time on your hands, and you were bored, and you had energy, is being in that situation without a job, being turned down from jobs, hanging out in the streets, is that a good thing or a bad thing for people in that situation?
oh, it's a bad thing.
What kinds of things tend to happen when you get especially a handful of young people to tough neighborhood
Get
in
cut
that
up,
situation.
I'm sorry, you get cut up with different people. You might probably end up, I guess, doing drugs, just going a different route instead of just being focused and trying to go to school, just finish school. So,
Okay. So this program is actually a program that helps keep kids away from the bad stuff and get them involved in good stuff, right?
Correct.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about the program or your experience?
it's a great program. Just starting off from nothing, just going to summer. It's an outdoor job, so it's a great job.
So you actually get paid now?
Right now, yeah, I'm getting paid.
Okay. Do you have a mom?
A mom? Yes.
Is she proud of you?
Yes, she is.
What does she say about the program? Has she ever talked to you about it? Has she asked you about it?
She talks to me about it because I guess when I actually started with the Texas Canyon hot shots, I used to take off all the time. So she was like, "Oh, where are you leaving?" Because actually she feels that I'm safer going out there than being at home.
Whoa, wait a minute. Wait, you touched on something. What do you mean by that? If my mom thought that I was going to be running into a fire trying to put it out, she would think that's very dangerous. But you just said that your mom thinks you're safer fighting fires.
Because I live in a different neighborhood. That's kind of, I guess, if you're around, it's not kind of good, to be in that neighborhood.
So what dangers might your mom be thinking about
It's
when
actually
if you're not fighting fires and you're back home?
because she knows that actually that's what I like doing, working outdoors and just hiking and pretty much working. She prefers that instead of being at home. Just
Well, what dangers are back in the neighborhood that your mom worries about?
you might get killed. There's different,
What, you might get killed, the dog's going to bite you to death,
no,
you're
I'm
going to
talking
get run
about
over by a
different
car?
neighborhoods.
What's that?
Different neighborhoods. There's different gangs where I live. There's gangs. There's always drive-bys, and
Okay.
so that's the kind
So
of.
your mom's afraid that if you're back home, you might get shot.
Yes.
Does your mom think that if you're back home, you might be robbing a liquor store and get shot, or you just might be walking to the store and get shot? What does she worry about?
I just probably be walking to the store and get shot.
Okay, so even your mom worries that even though you're not doing anything bad, but because you live in that neighborhood,
Yes.
that somebody might shoot you just because you happen to be there and somebody does a drive-by or something.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yes.
Yeah, I was actually going to say a lot of these gentlemen right here, that's one of the reasons why they like coming to work here. A lot of them want to remain not speaking, but they were letting me know that this is some of the opportunity where they're actually able to go into a different area, see other places, because if they were on their own time, they would not even be allowed to travel in that area. Coming in the crew buggy where the red has the fire crew painted on it, they're able to go out of state and stuff. This is the only opportunity they're getting to stay safe, stay away from it. They're actually bringing some of their buddies. We have roughly about 100 people that come to apply. We do trainings where we take them on hikes. We went for a camping trip. So we get them ready for the academy. We're actually training them for success. So by the time they go to the academy, they're going to be able to pass their test, not because they're cheating, but because they actually know the information there.
How many people at any given time do you have capacity for to be able to train? Like at what point do you get full and you say, "Gosh, you got to wait for the next crew"?
Since because of the work schedule that they have and school schedule, some of the people are trying to either go back to another trade. At a given time, you could come on a Wednesday or Saturday, and we have roughly about anywhere from 40 to 60 people training. So what we do is we send them to an academy, and it's normally once a year, normally between April and May. And if they don't make it during that time, we'll just say, "Hey, come back and we can help you next year."
Okay.
But we never close the door on anybody. We try to always give them that opportunity.
Okay. Good.
This opportunity that they're doing right now, they're actually able to get a federal grant for, where they're doing at the Elysian Park, the Alley River. They were doing another, the Red Card District, I believe it's called. It's right there where Fletcher and Riverside is. So they're helping out. They're having some encampment problems. So,
Okay.
and we're trying to keep them busy. And
All right. Okay. Does anybody else in the black shirts want to say anything else before this committee? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation, and thank you very much for sharing with us about your personal story. And at this time, what we're going to do with this item, it's okay. We're done asking questions. Unless you had any more? I didn't think so. We're going to put this item over to the April 24th committee hearing. At that time, we'll have the fire department here, and so we can have a dialogue on a little bit more of the technical aspects of the internal workings of the program. So with that, there are no more public comment cards on item number 5. Public comment is closed on item number 5. So we'll keep that item in committee and agendize it for April 24th. Next, we will go to item number 2.
2?
Yes.
Thank you. Item 2, motion Cardenas Huizar, instructing departments with gang-focused programs to report with procurement and contract information for each program.
Okay. Is anybody here from CLA ready to present and dialogue with us on this motion? Anybody here from some of the city departments who might be affected by this motion? We're on item number 2. Let me read a summary of the item. The motion instructs city departments with gang-focused programs as described in the CLA report dated July 24, 2007, to report with contractual and procurement information related to sources and uses of funds, whether services are provided by city staff or outside contractors. 3, method of procurement, RFP or RFQ, date of expiration of current contracts, and regulations or restrictions limiting the use of program funding. The motion also instructs the CLA to compile the information described in this motion and provide a summary report to this committee. Ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning. Meg Barclay and my staff has been working, as you know, diligently on this, so I'll let her.
And you are?
I'm Jerry Miller, the Chief Legislative Analyst.
I know that. Wanted everybody listening to know that.
Good morning, Meg Barclay with the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office. As referenced in the motion, our office prepared a report classifying programs identified as addressing youth development and gang violence in last year's proposed budget according to program type. And that report received extensive review and public comment in this committee, and a final set of programs agreed upon by the committee, and I believe the community and city departments identified as gang-focused was ultimately agreed upon. And so we would work with departments identified.
On those gang-focused programs?
Excuse me?
What was the total dollar amount that we spend on those gang-focused?
I believe the final total dollar amount was around $37 million. So
How much?
$37 million.
Do you remember the breakdown between, at least at that time, what we used to identify as prevention and intervention, et cetera?
The only intervention program identified in that report was the LA Bridges program.
Bridges 2.
Yes, Bridges 2, excuse me. And that program, I believe, has a budget of around $3 to $4 million. And then the rest of those were either targeted gang-focused prevention programs or multi-focused.
Okay. All right.
And those were the programs that would be addressed, I believe, in this report. The suppression programs were considered outside of that category.
Okay. Now, when it comes to third-party providers, do we have RFQ processes that we use at all, or is it RFP processes, or how do we fund third-party providers in these programs?
I believe primarily, and that really wasn't addressed in the report, so we'd have to get, I could speak anecdotally to that, but specifically not really. So those would be questions more accurately answered by the departments themselves.
Okay. Anybody here from any of the departments that are involved in gang-focused programs? I thought you were here. Yes.
Good morning, Council.
Bring the mic a little closer to you. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Jessica Hines with the City Attorney's Office, and I was just called to come down and answer any questions, if I can, on procurement.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So procurement in general, not just procurement with the City Attorney's Office.
I've been handling CDBG procurement issues.
Got it. Thank you. CDD?
Hi. Sharon Morris with CDD, and we do go through a procurement process for the vast majority of the programs in our department.
How would you describe that process? Is it strictly an RFP process or RFQ process, or is some kind of hybrid thereof?
We do both. We primarily go through an RFP process, but for some of our programs, when we have very specific qualifications we look at, we'll do an RFQ first, and then based on the folks who qualify under that, we'll send out an RFP. An example of that is what we've just done with the FDNs in the San Fernando Valley, where we did an RFQ to establish who could serve that area and who could qualify as a CBDO, and then we sent the RFP only to that group of people.
Okay. What we need for this committee, based on what we need to do to get our own house in order, is we need to understand when it comes to these $37 million or so of programs, as identified in the July 07 report, what sources of funds actually accumulate into that 37 million? And then in addition to that, what are the expected uses of those funds? What I mean by that is not only what we expect the use of those funds to be, but those funds that are attached to special dollars, such as CDB funds, CDBG funds, et cetera. What are the restrictions and or expectations that confine us as to how we can actually contract out, what we can do with those that money, and what kind of correspondence we need to provide for the funders so that they understand that we've used the money properly. So we're going to need that. In addition to that, what I'd like to have broken down is how much of those funds are where services are provided by city staff, and how much of those funds are going to third-party contractors to provide funds. And then obviously inherent in that, for example, if we have dollars going out to a third-party provider, how much of that money is retained by the city for oversight and or correspondence on that contract. Okay, so I want to get a ratio of breakdown of how much money we're using for management purposes to oversee, and how much money is actually hitting the streets, or supposed to hit the streets with those third-party providers. Also, how much money is being dedicated with city resource personnel that's supposedly street-level service. Okay. Also, what this committee needs to understand is what methods of procurement are we allowed to engage in? Again, mainly based on the dollars, where they're coming from, and what confinements we may or may not have on how we can actually utilize those funds. Does CDBG allow RFQ processes? Do they encourage it? Do we have particular language that we still have to yet, unfortunately, challenge the process and find out if, in fact, there's clarity or as to what we want to do, and we need to get clarification as to whether or not we can do that. The methods of procurement, where we are or not confined between RFP processes and RFQ processes. When's the date of expiration with our contracts with our third-party providers? And also, are those in line with, are they or in line or not in line with the actual sources of funding? Okay? Because we may get funding that actually doesn't have a July 1st, timeline, which is our fiscal year here in the city. We may have programs that actually go from April to April for all we know. Again, looking at Washington, they do their budgeting in October, right? They supposed to pass their budget in October, which is totally offline with local government and state government in California, and also the county. We all work on a fiscal year starting July 1st. And also, in light of all of those questions, what this committee needs is to understand what the regulations or restrictions are limiting the use of program funding in light of that series of questions and that issue, especially when it comes to RFQs, RFPs. Any other questions on this item? Okay. I know that's a lot, but thank God we have the '07 report that at least delineates what we're even talking about. We have the main department here that handles most of these programs, not all, but most of them, CDD. And we have the city attorney's office here because a lot of these things are going to have to be vetted through your office. How long do we need to report back to this committee in order to delineate those answers and so we can discuss it policy-wise in the committee?
Well, from CDD's perspective, a couple of weeks.
2 weeks? I was hoping to hear that. 2 weeks?
It might take us a couple weeks to get the information from departments. We may need a little bit longer than that to compile it, but we do
Okay.
have information on the sources of funds, so it would be a question of that procurement information.
Okay, then for right now, let's try to push hearing this item in committee in 2 weeks and have that information ready.
Okay.
If in fact we need another week, hint, 1 more week, then we will put it off for 1 more week to have a holistic discussion, make sure we have all the information before us.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So with that, we're going to adopt those instructions to the departments and the city attorney's office. Thank you very much. And the CLA. And in addition to that, expect to have those reports back in 2 weeks. And again, as always, if for some reason a department doesn't seem to be understanding what it is we're asking of them, please engage my office and we'll try to help explain that.
Absolutely.
Okay, especially on the timeline. I know everybody's busy, it's budget time, but we have to do this. Okay? All right, thank you. Now we move to item number 1. I'm sorry, before we move to item number 1, thank you, we're done. We have public comment. Ben Schirmer? Sorry about that.
I'm Ben Shermer. I'm the Executive Director for Rainbow Services, and we're a domestic violence agency, shelter-based agency down in San Pedro. And I had sent a letter off a couple days ago in response to the Controller's report, the Blueprint report, expressing concerns about how domestic violence was not included. The city's domestic violence task force was not consulted in coming up with that report, and how much of a connection there is between the two. So I've been starting to follow this primarily because the funding for the domestic violence shelters, the now infamous $19 million, it's in there, it's not in there. I know the Controller's office posted late Tuesday a list of the programs that are part of the $19 million. At yesterday's audit hearing, the Controller stated that domestic violence shelter funding is in the $19 million, but when I pulled off the report from the website, it's not in the $19 million. CDD has a list. It's in their list. So my concern, and I'm just supporting...
Are you confused now?
I'm a little confused.
Okay, I don't blame you.
So that's really... I just want to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. I appreciate this committee's concern. The Controller said it yesterday, and I can't agree with her more. The devil's in the details. And my concern is that I'm hearing this push to sort of move forward quickly, and my concern is that we inadvertently create new problems when attempting to solve old problems. And the Controller yesterday said, well, we need to move quickly because people are dying because of gang violence. Well, people are dying because of domestic violence. So what I don't want to do is just trade one problem for another. So that's why I keep coming to these hearings and keep raising the issue of domestic violence. I know that CDD is concerned about the services as well. I just want to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. And when you get reports that are so inconsistent, you can't help but worry.
So would you agree with my colleague a few weeks ago in this committee when, especially referencing child care and domestic violence issues, she said that it looks like we may be robbing Paula to pay Peter? Are you concerned about that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very concerned that this report was put together without any input from any domestic violence agency or from the city's domestic violence task force, and yet this report includes domestic violence shelter funding as part of the $19 million that may be redirected because it's not seen as being anti-gang funding. And yet, and I brought this up at the hearing yesterday, we have a family that just left our shelter where the 13-year-old son was being harassed and abused by his father, who is a gang member, because the 13-year-old does not want to join the gang. So that clearly is a case, and we have a lot of those cases, especially since we're in San Pedro, when we serve a lot of South LA residents. We get a lot of victims of domestic violence that are fleeing from households where there's a gang member. So there is a very direct connection, and a lot of the studies have shown that. The violence in the home.
But even though there's a direct connection,
yes,
your domestic violence shelter deals with all victims, not
Correct.
just victims who have some kind of connection with a gang element or a
Correct.
person who's involved in gangs.
And that's a big part of the domestic violence field's concern is we don't see ourselves as a subset of gang violence. We see a relationship, and clearly a lot of the clients that we're dealing with, but not all. So while there's a relationship, and I think that we could do more to help those families that are living in violent homes, that are living with gang members, that are dealing with domestic violence, that's not all of our clients. So there are probably other programs and other services that don't cleanly fall under the umbrella. It's not a bright line test to say this program is either under the umbrella, as I've heard it called, of anti-gang programs. It's just not as clean cut. There's a lot of gray area, and I just appreciate you wanting to look into those details and get specific information before moving forward.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come to committee and express those concerns.
Keep coming back.
And your understanding. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Burdine? Burdine.
Yes, I'm Sarah Burdine, and I'm the Executive Director of Haven Hills, which serves victims of domestic violence in the San Fernando Valley and throughout the city of LA. And I'm not going to take the time. I concur with everything that Mr. Shermer just expressed, but I do want to emphasize that these different reports, these are very confusing, and this is a great concern for me. And when you just said, sir, about robbing Peter to pay Paul.
No, robbing Paula to pay Peter.
Okay.
That one. Quote her appropriately.
Okay. I am concerned about that too, because we've been identified in this report where we're being reviewed. And again, with our agency and their 30 years of service that we've been providing to victims, we have seen many, many families that have come in that they are either exposed to the gang violence and or they're gang members within the family, and that's where the violence is coming from directly, but there's also additional fears for them because of that, the gang members. And I feel that yesterday we were before a committee, and I know that Sharon Morris from CDD spoke, and because I had also sent a letter to some of the committee people, and Councilman Huziar, you were present, they asked CD, for the dollar amount that Haven Hills received, and it was reported at $70,000. Well, afterwards I spoke, and I know that the reports are going to be sent, but actually the dollar amount is $366,000, so that's a lot of money, and that doesn't support, the city is not supporting all of our shelter programs. It's only supporting a portion of the services that we're providing. And again, I'm speaking for all of the agencies because they're in a similar situation where we are working and we want to be a part of the gang anti-problem, but we don't want to.
Is one of, if I'm hearing you right, is one of your concerns is that whatever we do as policymakers, we need to move quickly, obviously, as quickly as quickly and responsibly, so that we don't inadvertently cause other problems, or, as Mr. Shermer said, that programs or funding fall through the cracks, and then we inadvertently hurt a program that we need and we agree needs to be funded, that we need to be careful about how we move forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, but I just want to make it clear. I don't want to make it seem like we're being political here, but you're not saying that there isn't an urgency. You understand that there
Oh,
isn't?
no, I
Okay.
absolutely
Exactly.
understand the urgency, because actually, we see a lot of lives lost because of domestic violence, but what we're seeing is a tremendous loss of life because of gangs. And I really understand, and I really think that expediting this is absolutely crucial. And I...
However, doing it carefully and responsibly.
That is
And
correct.
making sure that we minimize the amount of errors or mistakes and inadvertent suffering from programs, which means when a program suffers and gets caught in a mistake, inevitably that could or does hinder their ability to provide services, correct?
That is correct.
I mean, I can't imagine your program is sitting on $1 billion or $1 million endowment, right? I
Oh,
mean,
we
you're
are
more of a
not. In
month-to-month organization.
fact, with the funding cuts that are from the state, city, and county that we're experiencing, we're struggling to be able to maintain the programs, and I'm concerned that the impact, if there is any, on the funding for domestic violence being diverted to other programs, we would actually need not only to cut back in services, but even possibly lose services altogether.
So you could close down if it got bad enough.
Yeah, if it got
So you,
bad.
you don't have that kind of cushion?
No, we do not have
You don't
cushion.
have X number of months in reserves? You don't have, unfortunately, you don't have some billionaire who cuts checks every time you're short on payroll or what have you. You are a month-to-month organization, basically.
That is correct.
So if the city were to make some kind of mistake or rush to do something and hinder your funding or delay your funding or what have you, that could either curtail services or, if it bad enough, it would actually cause you to possibly close down, at least temporarily
That is correct.
or permanently.
Yes.
If it's that bad.
And then I would also like to say, as I'm also a member of the city task force, and as far as being able to speak for others on there, we're not the only, I sit here and I feel comfortable. I can't necessarily speak for those programs, but knowing their circumstances, many of the programs throughout the city that are being funded by CDD are facing the same situation that Haven Hills is and what you were just relaying.
Okay, thank you very much. Lily Herrera?
Good morning. Lily Herrera. I'm with Peace Over Violence. We're also a domestic violence sexual assault prevention agency. And I'm sorry I wasn't quite prepared to speak this morning on this, but just here.
A little bit closer to the microphone,
I'm
please.
sorry. I thought it was important for us to also point out that I am actually a division assistant manager for our prevention division. I'm sorry. And we work closely with high-risk youth. We are part of the LA Bridges program, and we're also part of LAPD's Juvenile Impact Program. We see a lot, and I don't want to repeat everything what our sister agencies have said, but I do want to point out that it is very important that these reports are also clear, because we don't necessarily have funding directly to work with high-risk youth, but a lot of our programs do actually come across a lot of these youth that are affected by DV, and a lot of these youth are also gang members. We do work closely with Bridges too. Like I mentioned, we're part of Bridges 1. One of the things that also, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Pat Brown Institute, Bill Martinez's gang prevention specialist training. We take part of that, and this started happening maybe about 10 years ago, that they started acknowledging that there is a huge correlation between domestic violence and gang youth. So I just wanted to also put us on the table that we are a little bit confused on the report as well. And I've been sitting at these meetings a couple of times now, and I know that we weren't contacted by Lord Schick's office either.
So you were not contacted by the controller's
not
office?
to my knowledge, no.
Okay, but your program was somehow affected by the $19 million mentioned in her report?
I'm not sure on that. Like I said, I know that our executive director has been asking us to come and inform her back on these reports. I'm not sure how affected, or if we were affected, but I know that.
I'm sorry, not affected yet, because no action has been taken
Right.
on a report, but included in that $19 million, your program is part of that $19 million in funding so
Yes,
far? Okay.
yes.
So in that sense, you potentially could be affected if somebody acted on that night, on that report,
Yeah.
and included that $19 million. Therefore, by those actions, you would be affected
Yes,
because
we
you're
would.
on that
Yes,
list.
we would.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anybody else here for public comment on item number 2? Yeah, Bob. We're on item number 4. Yeah, we haven't got there yet. No, we do. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, so that concludes our public comment on item number 2. With that, we anticipate getting the reports back from the various departments in the CLA's office and the city attorney correspondence within 2 weeks, and if not, then we'll hear it the following week. So we'll hear that in committee in 2 weeks with those report backs. Next item, we go to item number 1.
Item 1, motion Cardenas Reyes instructing CDD with the assistance of the CLA and CAO to report relative to the use of a request for qualifications process to procure gang intervention services.
CDD? CLA? I'm sorry, CAO and CLA. Oh, we have the CAO here today. Cool.
Good morning. Jerry Miller again, CLA. I believe a lot of this discussion actually was covered in item number 2. Very similar issues, and I know CDD can elaborate on this, but a request for qualifications process can be very beneficial to narrowing down the organizations that can provide the services, focusing the procurement process. But as you indicated, we need to make sure that the funding sources are compatible with that and the processes comply with.
Now, what I'd like to do, and I think we need to do this because every time we cover the issue of RFQ and RFP, some people in America seem to think that an RFP is the only way to go, and I don't think they're willing to internalize the fact that in certain instances an RFQ actually creates better efficiency, still assures quality of service and appropriateness of contracting, and actually allows us to utilize more resources on the street level rather than use it for administrative purposes. So could you, Jerry, give us an example of the difference, or describe a little bit of the differences between an RFP process and an RFQ process, and where an RFQ process, when utilized appropriately, actually enhances those things that I just described?
Sure. Well, an RFP, a request for proposals process, in essence, the city would define exactly what services it wants. It would put out a request for proposals to respond to that. The city would then evaluate that and hire the best responder to provide the services. Request for qualifications process, they can actually be combined but be somewhat separate. On a request for qualifications process, the city would define what qualifications are essential to provide the services, put out a request for qualifications and get providers to respond to that, and then have a list of the organizations out there that do have the necessary qualifications to provide the service. So that can be used in 2 ways. One way is then when we're ready to put out a request for proposals, the population that we're sending the RFP out is smaller. It's a faster process to procure the services, easier to evaluate. I think
RFP or RFQ?
Using an RFQ, then if we're then going to do an RFP,
okay,
we solicit from that RFQ group, the qualified list. It makes it faster and more efficient. But another important way to use an RFQ is in emergency situations. If there's a crisis situation and the city needs to go to a provider immediately, then it has the pre-qualified list of people that can provide those services and move quickly to get services in place.
Now, when you say pre-qualified, isn't that one of the main reasons why, whether it's government or private, would utilize an RFQ process? Basically, what they do in that process, they actually determine if you make it on the list after an RFQ process, that means that you have proven that you are qualified to do to provide that kind of service, correct?
Correct.
And then what you just described is if you have that pool or that list of organizations, then if something comes up where you need to put something out on the street and get services rendered or enhanced very quickly, like within a week or so, you could actually go to that RFQ list. If you don't have that RFQ list, you're either forced to give the work to somebody who you're hoping is qualified, and or you have to delay putting the service on the street by going through an RFP process if required, correct?
That's exactly right.
So actually, if the RFQ process is done properly and it's done well, then that sets the stage for us to be more responsive and more efficient down the road when we need when we need to put those services on the street.
Absolutely.
Okay. And an RFP process basically is a process that you start over and over and over every time you need to put some services on the street, and you don't have some kind of pool of qualified providers.
Yes, most of the time that is the way it works. Again, you can combine the two and still do an RFP process, but limit the number of people that you're seeking responses from to the people on the qualified list, so you can move much faster.
So basically, if you did an RFP process the way you just described it, combined with an RFQ process, the RFQ process very likely will have been done, and then you do an RFP process within the pool of qualified people who pass that RFQ process.
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to clarify that because we talk about that all the time, and we see that all the time, but people listening, taxpayers, might not understand that, what you just described. So that's why I wanted you to go through it step by step, and thank you for giving the last example of an RFP process as being after the fact of an RFQ process where you've already identified who the good providers are for those services.
Right.
Okay. And then they compete with each other by putting in paperwork saying, on this job, I can do X, Y, Z for X amount, et cetera, correct?
Correct.
And that's the RFP process you just described.
Right.
Okay. All right. CAO, want to shed some light on this matter? We're on item number 1.
I would just concur with Mr. Miller's comments that, the RFQ process does give you more flexibility. However, it usually is best when you do follow it with an RFP within that select group, because you still have issues of how firms were selected off the qualified list. And so you do provide more flexibility, and you're ready to respond more quickly if you've done that pre-qualification first. Then you typically need still criteria of how you select off the list for the particular service you're looking for.
And also at the same time, when you have an RFQ process and you've already selected a group of organizations, for example, that have met that requirement and now make that list, it doesn't mean that they don't have to respond to updates of whether or not they still are in that position to provide that kind of service, et cetera. Then they have a responsibility to correspond with the city on those kinds of detailed questions. It's not like they say, I already answered those questions, I don't need to answer them again, correct? We have the right and the responsibility to ask them to update us at any given time, so that we make sure that they still are in the position to do the kind of work that we qualified them for at an earlier date.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay. And the reason why I say that is because I think government is always accused of allowing things to go stale and not keeping things updated, or giving the wrong kind of contractor some work when they're no longer qualified, or maybe they were good at it in 2007, but in 2008, they really don't have that expertise anymore. So what we do, and we have to do responsibly, is we have to get some correspondence with them so that we have it on record that they still do meet those qualifications, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Again, some of these things might seem a little mundane to you, but I want to make sure that, this is a public hearing. The public, the taxpayers are listening, I hope, and I just want to make them understand that, when we do things like this, RFPs, RFQs, there is a method to the madness, and there are ways in which we have checks and balances and can keep the process responsible. When it comes to LA Bridges 1 and 2 and the family development networks and other services, what processes are we using right now? RFQs, RFPs?
For the Bridges program and for the ongoing.
Now, hold on. There's Bridges 1 and Bridges 2.
Right, for both.
We use the same one for both, or are there
Well,
any delineations of different?
they were different RFPs, but for those programs, they were selected several years ago under just the RFP process.
Okay.
And the ongoing family development networks were also selected under just the RFP process. But as I was mentioning earlier, when we found that we had to replace the contractors in the San Fernando Valley, we did the RFQ first because we knew it would be a limited group of people and we didn't want to receive...
Because it's specialized work, right? Not everybody does that work.
It's specialized work, and we wanted agencies that were indigenous to the communities, that had a presence there and had been serving those populations for a period of years. So we weren't looking for somebody from San Pedro to move to the valley to provide those services. We only wanted folks that were already there, and we knew what we wanted, providers in East Valley or North Valley and South Valley. And so we had people, and they had to be community-based development organizations. So we sent out the RFQ, so everybody who felt that they could meet that criteria responded first. We sorted through that list, and the ones that we were able to pre-qualify then received the RFP.
Okay. So that's kind of like what Jerry Miller was describing a little earlier, where you have an RFQ process, and then after that, then you have an RFP process with that group of folks who passed the first RFQ process.
That's right.
Okay, excellent. Now, when it comes to timelines and staffing requirements and things of that nature, how do those things get handled?
Sending out the RFQs or RFPs.
Not only sending them out, but receiving them, evaluating them, et cetera.
Right. It's a pretty time-consuming process. The staff that does that work are the same staff that do the programming and monitoring. We have a planning group within our divisions. They write the RFPs. It comes through City Council. We get permission to send it out, so there is a look at what we're going to be asking of the agencies. It's generally on the street a minimum of 30 days. We try to give longer than that if we can. Somehow we always manage to have them on the street during the holidays, and people need more time to respond to them. Once we've received all of the responses by a deadline within the RFP, there's the review process. Generally, staff will do the initial review to make sure that they're responsive to what we were looking for. Those proposals that have been responsive then go on for a further review. We try to bring experts in from other organizations. The county helps us out a lot, and other cities to do the next level of review and score the proposals. We take those proposals and we look at any past experience we've had with the organizations. If we've contracted with them before, we're going to look at, the past audits and monitoring reports that we have on those organizations. And from there, we develop a recommendation that again comes back to the mayor and the council for final approval.
At this point in time, looking at this motion, which asks CDD specifically to indicate whether or not there's any issues with providing an RFQ process for intervention programs, is there anything that would preclude us from doing that at this time that your office can think of?
We could certainly do the type of RFQ that we just did for the FDNs, but we would want to follow it by an RFP.
Okay, so basically it would be a combination.
Yes.
But we could put on the front end the RFQ process, and then, again, once particular needs or requirements for us to put some services out on the street and picking them, we would do that by an RFP process.
That's correct.
Now, can you help us understand if we didn't have in that scenario an RFQ process already in place, if we hadn't gone through an RFQ process and then we want to go through an RFP process which is much broader without having to preempted it with an RFQ process, is there a time element savings by doing RFQ then RFP, or?
Well, you have a longer time frame in that you're taking two steps rather than one step. But as Mr. Miller was saying, once you've narrowed down the field, you only have you have a smaller universe of proposals coming back to you that get the real, scrutiny by staff, our panels, and the council. That we can be assured that the folks that have responded do qualify. It's just who's going to do the best job for us in delivering the service we want.
So my question to you is this. If with the intervention programs, if we go strictly with an RFP process as option A versus going through an RFQ process, then through the RFP when we finally give the contracts out to individual organizations, the secondary RFP process, as I described, is that a shorter time frame than just purely doing an RFP process without the RFQ process first?
Well, we would still want to give them, the 30 days and so forth, but it would be a shorter review process because you'd have many fewer proposals.
Okay. All right. Any comments on the intervention programs going through the scenario we just talked about? No. Okay. Thank you. All right. So with that, what we'll do is hear public comment. If there's anybody here on item number 1. Item number 1, I don't have any public comment cards on item number 1. Anybody? Thank you. Anybody here to make public comment on item number 1? Seeing and hearing none, public comment is closed. Thank you. On item number 1, with that, we have a motion to adopt item number 1. Seconded. Okay. And so that since we don't have a quorum, we will move that item forward as a recommendation from the chair. Okay. That's item number 1. We have gone through item number 1, number 2, and number 5. Now we go to item number 3.
Item 3, motion Cardenas Parks instructing the CLA to report with the steps necessary to create a new city department for the management of all city's youth development and gang prevention and intervention programs.
Jerry Miller again, CLA.
Okay.
And Karen Sisson, CAO.
Well, really, I think the process for setting up a department in the context that you're reviewing is really the same as setting up any department. The first step is exactly what this committee has been doing for some time. It's exactly, I think, the point of the Advancement Project report and Ms. Chick's report, and that is to define precisely what it is that you want to do. The surveys of the various functions, what falls within the context of the responsibilities that the department would take on, those need to be defined. The costs need to be defined. The mission needs to be defined. From there, it's really an administrative process. Most all departments are established by ordinance. There are a few in the charter, but they're generally established by ordinance, and that would
the personnel department be involved?
Well, they certainly, yes, they would be involved.
Anybody here from the personnel department? No? Anybody here who is charged with being involved in personnel department matters like this?
Councilmember, we do have Tom Coltis from the CAO's Employment Relations Division, who is prepared to speak to those issues.
I was hinting at that. Come on, man. Come on up. Thank you. All right. So the personnel department would be involved.
Absolutely, in allocating the positions, in
Titles.
Titles, establishing salary levels. If there are new positions that are created, the Civil Service Commission actually, creates the new classes. CAO sets the salaries, and the issues again of employee relations, which Mr. Coltis can get into, which units would represent them. That whole process. In again determining all of that, it would be set by ordinance, and you would have the at least the short-term option of doing resolution authorities for positions. There are departmental personnel ordinances which each department has, which by ordinance establishes positions, and on a long-term basis that's generally done. But to move quickly, you can also do them by resolution authority. That's really the broad process. Obviously, it's an ordinance, so it would be subject to council approval and mayoral concurrence.
Okay. Now, when creating a new department, and in light of what we're talking about here on this item, we're talking about the city's youth development and gang prevention and intervention programs. These inherently are programs that are in existence today. So there is personnel within the city who are overseeing these programs. There are third-party providers who are being funded for some of these programs, et cetera. So all of those dollars are basically flowing to the work that needs to be done as we speak. That being the case, in that kind of scenario, is it possible to create a new department that is actually revenue neutral at the end of the day?
Maybe I'll let Mr. Coltis speak to the sort of the staffing issues you raised, but I think it gets back to what Mr. Miller just said, is what is the mission of the department going to be? What is the goal of the department, and what services is it going to provide? Is it going to be a more broad definition? Is it going to be a narrower definition? And depending on where that comes out, and of course we have a lot to work with. As he mentioned, the advancement project report, Controller Chick's report, and the policy discussion that's going on in this very committee. So when you say, can it be revenue neutral, I would have to say it depends, because are you going to continue doing everything that's being done now by the existing departments involved in what we would agree are gang prevention services? Are you going to tailor those services more narrowly, or are you going to broaden them? But depending on the scope, you could be revenue neutral. You might even find that you could expand certain services and be revenue neutral because you're reducing others that have shown themselves not to be as effective. So it's really hard to just come up with an answer to that question until we know the specifics of what that is going to look like and how it's going to be.
That's why I used the word, is it possible to create such a new department as described in this motion and be revenue neutral? I don't want to be the only one saying that it is possible. I want to hear if anybody else can concur that it's possible. Not that it will be done that way, not that it will be revenue neutral, but is that possibility in existence?
Yes, it is.
Yes?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Jerry Miller? Okay, you say yes.
And no, yes, it is. I think I just spoke to that. Yeah.
Well, we have the resident minutia expert here, and he's not saying anything.
Well, I was in the personnel department, and I have moved from the personnel department, so I don't speak for the personnel department anymore. And that's why, specifically to your question, is there a personnel representative here? No, I'm not representing the personnel department. That's been made perfectly.
And that's why I said somebody who can shed some light.
A little more vaguely defined as kind of knowing something about HR. Yeah, I think I could fit that bill. Historically, this goes back multiple years, but we created the housing department out of the community development department.
Great. Speak a little bit closer to the microphone, because I'm listening, because I've only been a councilman for 5 years, and there's a lot of history in this city that I don't know about.
The housing function at one point in time was contained within the community development department. The issue was raised as is that the most appropriate structure? The decision was made to create a housing department in and of itself. At the point in time that was done, the instructions were to create that as a revenue neutral transaction. It was revenue neutral specific.
For a little while?
Exactly. It was revenue neutral on the day it was created. Now,
Wow, that was a quick little while.
Now, whether it was revenue neutral beyond day 2 or not, but on
Well, with all due respect, the dynamics as was described, with functions changing, et cetera, perhaps somebody could say that in some aspects it was revenue neutral based on certain activities, but if there's expanded activities, then it sort of still is revenue neutral because those activities over and above what the revenue was being utilized for with the more limited activities.
Exactly. If you create a new gang department, for example, and you are successful soliciting
I prefer to call it Youth Development and Juvenile Justice Department. I want to get the word gang out of there.
My mistake. If they're successful going...
No, nobody knew about that because I made it up today as I was writing the notes. So don't feel bad. If you would have known, then I would be worried.
I clearly didn't know. If they're successful going out and securing massive additional federal grants, for example, to address this issue, then clearly it's not a revenue neutral situation. It's you have resources today, those resources will change probably immediately upon execution of any strategy.
Okay. All right. So technically speaking, it is possible in the strictest sense if there were like-for-like activities or what have you, like-for-like positions, et cetera, and if it were that easy and clean, technically it could. But realistically, just by the nature of responsibility shifts and perhaps responsibility enhancements, like the example of the housing department, it's my understanding that when that new department was created, some other responsibilities were added on to that.
Additional responsibilities were added over the years. Originally, housing did not have the multifamily code enforcement function.
There you go.
For example, that was an additional function that was added. The initial function was primarily rent control and the housing development activity and the housing rehab activity.
See, the thing is, that's a great example because one of the things that people are talking about in this city is that we're not doing enough when it comes to addressing youth, issues of youth, issues who are youth that are at risk, trying to get kids out of gangs and things of that nature. Across the board, everybody who's looked into it throws their hands up and says we're not doing enough. So very likely, whatever we do moving forward, we're hoping that we figure out ways in which we can do more. The Advancement Project report points out, the 90+ thousand young people, not just under 18, but young people who are out of school and or out of work at a given time. We're not addressing that population. We're not even working well with half of that population. We're not even touching half of that population. My point is, the objective, I think that by the Advancement Project report, and it was mentioned in Laura Chick's report, and it's been gone over in this committee and articulated by the various departments who work with youth, is that we could do more. We're only doing what we have limited resources to work with. So I wanted to mention that because I think that regardless of what happens, I'm hoping and expecting that we don't have a revenue neutral, whatever we do. I hope that we can enhance services to that community, to that constituent, regardless of what we do. So I just want to set the stage that we're expecting in the city that we're not going to be revenue neutral when it comes to finding money, grabbing money, moving money, getting new money, hopefully from other levels of government or what have you, to be able to address more of our youth population issues. But I want to thank you for bringing up the example of when the housing department was created out of CDD at one time, and that it was revenue neutral for probably a day. But with all due respect, you pointed out an example of services that are now provided by the housing department that the city didn't provide, correct? Out of any department. They were added services, technically, or added services connected to an admitted responsibility that we were going to take on.
They were enhanced.
Yeah, they were enhanced. Because obviously, there are things that happen in the city where a constituent may call and some good person in the city actually helps them with that issue, even though it's not delineated in their job description, but they actually service that constituent. What you described is where the housing department, the new housing department, admitted, accepted, and said, we are now going to handle this issue formally, correct?
And receive funding for it, yes.
And, well, that's an important part, too. Absolutely. Receiving funding is critical. Do you have any questions on this?
Yes, I think it would be good for us to look at this because there's a lot of discussion as to where our services should be placed, and unless we get a better comparison of what these two things would look like, I don't think the council or anyone else is prepared to really make a strong recommendation as to what's the best way to go about. One of the concern, well, I have a question, and I don't know if we've put much thought into this. So if we have a department, but we have, let's say, a program like CLASS in Rec and Parks, or we have some program that's housed somewhere else, some other department, do we intend to bring that into the new department, or we really don't have an answer to that
Don't
yet?
look at me. It wasn't my idea.
Yeah. Or do we, is that the type of thing you would get back to us on this report, or where can we,
Well,
or are you just going to report on, okay, in order for you to create a department, these are the steps you need to take?
Well, yes. I mean, that's largely what we're going to report back to you. And I think it goes back to, I think, the initial statement in creating a department is what is the mission. What does need to be there? If we're talking about, youth development and juvenile justice, what programs in the city are focused on that? What programs in the city, whether it's in Rec and Parks, whether it's Commission on Children, Youth, and Their Families, Commission on the Status of Women, whatever it happens to be, what are those programs today? Do we want those programs to stay the way they are today, or do we want those programs to
The way and where they are.
evolve? Exactly. Or do we want
You
them
would go
to
by program and make recommendations as to whether they should go in a new department or they should stay where they're at and just have the new general manager of that department
Well,
over.
rather
have
than
them-
say department, I don't want to taint that aspect. Whether or not those programs should be housed together, right? Or
Correct.
whether or not they're more appropriate to stay where they're at and why. You get what I'm saying? Because there's also motions rolling around yesterday that came out of your committee asking how do we shift these same programs over into an elected office, in this case the mayor's office. So
Right.
whether they consolidate or not, and then therefore after recommended consolidation, if they move to one place or another, what are the challenges in that, and what are the costs, et cetera?
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of that type of thing we did in the report that Ms. Markley referred to, and also the advancement project. I mean, what are we doing now? The $38 million, taking out suppression. Where are those programs? What is the focus? And we need to recognize for CLASS or some of the Rec and Parks programs.
80? I thought if we took out
When you take out the prevention, the suppression,
The suppression.
when you're truly only
30,
looking.
it's not 80?
It's what, 37, 38?
37?
Yeah. But some of the Rec and Parks programs are not necessarily, they're important for youth development and prevention and intervention, but they're not necessarily focused on that. It is a byproduct of those programs, but not the focus. So that needs to be a policy discussion about whether it's appropriate to move those programs into a separate entity or that's exactly the kind of policy decision that has to be had regardless of whether or not the decision is to create a new department or to move it into the mayor's office.
I think another element you really want to look at is effectiveness, because sometimes if something is being done very effectively where it is, even though in terms of its focus it might make sense to move it to some consolidated entity, there's also a train
paper.
of thought. Yeah, exactly. If you don't, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So you really want to look at whether some programs, however, might really benefit and become more effective by having them move. So there's also an element of trying to get some sense of metric or evaluation of how do things work effectively, because sometimes if you take things away from, say, a particular geographic location or more direct management structure, they lose effectiveness. So you have to look also at how are decisions going to be made quickly so that the services are delivered effectively, and that could influence your decision, even though on a philosophical basis that particular program may fit in a consolidated entity. So it's I think even a little bit more complex than just mission and scope, but also how do you make sure the service is delivered effectively.
And I'm beginning to realize that we shouldn't, everyone wants to consolidate, but we shouldn't consolidate for consolidation's sake, but also to see whether, just to have the goal, I think, is to have a person, a general manager, or whatever it may be, to say they're responsible. So whether it's in a new department or wherever these services have been consolidated, that they at least know what is going on with all these different
Or they get
programs and how they're
reported
different.
to, or there's some semblance of official connection between that head or individual and the programs that are identified that are addressing this street level issue.
But I think in addition to that, it also goes to duplication of efforts, reducing administrative costs, so the money's really going to service delivery, making sure that you don't have programs in different departments that are really focused on doing the same thing, and they're not working together effectively. I mean, that's really a strong argument for consolidation as well.
Or a perfect example, we may be funding a program at an elementary school that is within one block of a park, and they're basically doing the same thing.
Exactly.
And each one says, if I had 100 kids, I could service 100 kids. And each one of those is servicing only 50 kids. Right. And there really is nobody has been able to say that we need to have these 50 kids on this campus, and a block away, they cannot make it to the other. You follow what I'm saying? There's no
Absolutely.
semblance of reason as to why we couldn't. Like you said, that's an example of duplication of effort, where there's no reason why if we were to combine them, we'd still get a 98% attendance with 98 kids instead of 4950 on one campus and 4950 on the other campus, and they do exactly the same thing.
And I think you also touch on an excellent point, which is the importance of the school district and the county, and really having a consolidated effort, not having two different government entities trying to serve the same public, and really not coordinating and spending the money effectively.
I think what the theme is, if you look at the advancement project report and controller's report, the discussion is really what you're looking for is something that provides accountability. And that structure may take different forms, the consolidation may take different forms, but it's really about accountability so that there is a point where both the council and the public know, here's the spot where I can go to either say these programs are working or not. And that could take a number of different forms. But you really want something that allows accountability on this issue moving forward.
Yeah. One of my concerns that I expressed at yesterday's ad hoc audits committee was that if we move these consolidated programs into the mayor's office, and all these reports are saying that we need a lot more funding and services to really target these issues, that I see this, if we commit ourselves to that, if we have a program this large in the mayor's office and it keeps growing, both in terms of funding and service delivery, it will outbalance everything else that the mayor's doing. I mean, so I asked that question to the controller yesterday, and she responded that perhaps it's not permanent to put in the mayor's office if we continue to grow this service delivery, a consolidated service delivery for anti-gangs and youth development, and that perhaps at some point there may be a need for a department. So, any thoughts on that?
I was just looking at Mr. Coltis because he was reminding me that CDD actually started in the mayor's office.
CDD.
And then was moved out and created into a department.
And what was the goal or mission of CDD, the need to put this in the mayor's office? Or
this goes back a very long time. I'm almost ashamed to admit that I know about this. The Community Development Block Grant originally came to the City of Los Angeles. It was administered by the Community Development Agency.
A little louder, please.
Community Development Agency.
I actually listen to these tapes sometimes.
Yeah. Which
I'm putting
was
him
part
on
of the
the
mayor's
spot.
office. The originally CETA and then job training was originally administered out of the mayor's office. The mayor's office, the net effect of that was this entire entity. They grew to about the size of about 400 people in the mayor's office at that point in time.
Yeah.
Subsequently, it became clear that that was not where the mayor wanted it to be, and so the mayor proposed that it move out, and there were charter changes necessary to effectuate some of that movement as well.
What was the service delivery? It was CDBG.
The service delivery model was pretty much the same as what CDD has administered for a long period of time, which is
they do a number of things.
grants to community-based organizations. They had the housing component originally where they were doing housing rehab under the HOME program and the MORE program to rehabilitate single-family and multifamily homes. That housing production component where they were involved in new construction as well. And all of that was originally under the mayor's office, and then it was all spun out into community development department.
Okay. Has there ever been discussion, or maybe that is what CDD is of a human services department, or is that totally different, or do we always say that's the county's responsibility?
Well,
Why should we
there.
replicate that?
I mean, there has been some discussion along those lines, as Mr. Coltis indicated. Housing was split off, but there were other departments that we now have that were split off. Commission on the Status of Women Department, Disability Aging Department. I believe it was in Mayor Hahn's first budget. There was a proposal to sort of reconsolidate those into a broader Department of Social Services. I don't recall what the proposed title was. But yeah, it is periodically discussed, again, for purposes of efficiency of service delivery and not duplicating administrative costs. I think as Ms. Sisson said yesterday in the financial status report meeting, a couple of those are intending to share administrative functions and things. So yes, it had long-winded answer, but it has been discussed before.
And youth and anti-gang programs were proposed to be part of that, correct? Is that accurate?
At the time, I don't recall a discussion about moving around the anti-gang programs. I think they were pretty much housed as, well, the youth, the intervention and prevention services that were housed within what are now separate departments would have been moved back and consolidated within really what is now CDD, whether the title was changed or not. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, I just want to clarify. Once again, if the city were to move programs from various departments and put them into one department, there may be inherent expenses related to that movement, correct?
Yes, particularly if you're looking at co-location of functions that are not co-located now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so if we move various programs from departments into an elected office, then those same inherent possibilities of expenditures exist as well.
Regardless of how you consolidate, you may have some expenses related to the consolidation, but again, the absolute magnitude of that depends on what you do.
Yeah, that plays out.
Right.
We'll know that mostly after the fact or as those transitions are taking place.
Exactly.
Okay. And is there any inherent difference between moving programs from departments to a department versus from departments to an elected office? And what I'm getting at is, when you move programs from departments to a department, the actual personnel are civil service, by and large. There might be a handful of exempt positions, but you get my point. The vast majority of individuals who are working for those departments, and if they shift over into another department, they're from civil service to civil service status. Their status remains the same. But if we move people from departments into an elected office, in one of the examples that are rolling around, or the motions that's rolling around, into the mayor's office, inherently there is a change in some of the worker status from civil service to exempt, or how does that work?
That's an issue that has been raised. We're seeking clarification with the city attorney's office because the answer is unclear at this point in time. It's possible that...
How soon do you anticipate getting that answer from the city attorney's office?
Within the week.
Within a week?
Yeah.
Perfect. Because we wanted to bring this motion back within a week. So can the CAO's office continue to try to get that answer from the city attorney's office within a week?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And the good part about it, that question wasn't opposed. That request from the city attorney's office wasn't done yesterday, right?
No, we've been working on it for a couple days now.
Okay. All right. So they got a jump start on it. So hopefully within a week, they know that you've wanted it. This committee wants the answer. So hopefully they'll get us that answer by the time we hear this committee next Thursday. Thank you. General? Okay. So with that, on this item number 3, we're going to instruct the CAO to report back to this committee in 1 week with the options being considered for a new entity to address gang violence and the cost analysis associated with these options. Again, we understand that the cost analysis, you can't break it down to the dollar right now, but at least give us the elements of understanding of where some costs may come from, or in such transitions, be it departments to department or departments, activities within departments to the mayor's office, what elements of transition are the same and what are they, and then what elements may differ. For example, on the civil service question, which hopefully we can get some clarity from the city attorney's office, what elements might come into play there. Okay?
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're clear. We're basically going to look at the two different models, something that moves into an elected official's office versus a city department, how that would impact cost, and what would be the same and what might be different.
What identifiable costs
Right.
or activities we should know about, so we can know. I mean, what if it comes back and you say, sure, this box here of all these issues that need to be traversed is all that we need to deal with. Maybe we start to realize that no matter what we do with it, the complications thereof may bog us down so much that we may even lose our ability to even keep the level of service we have today. You get what I'm saying?
Yes,
So we can make a policy decision as to policy understanding, so that when we do make that decision or decisions, we know what the potential for cost and elements of activity we're going to have to traverse. Okay? All right. So with that, we'll hold this motion in committee pending the CAO's report. Obviously, if we're timeline for next Thursday, which we hope we are, then we'll hear it next Thursday. If anything seems to impede that timeline, please let us know as soon as you know that.
We will, Council.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Item number 3, public comment. I just received something from Susan Cruz. Is this on item number 3 or general public comment? Item number 3. Okay, please come forward.
Good morning.
Thank you.
My name is Susan Cruz. I'm here representing Sin Fronteras. I'm also a member of the Community Engagement Advisory Committee. I'm here to urge this committee to please consider what is going to be in the best interest of the population we're specifically talking about. Over the past few months, I've been hearing a lot going back and forth in terms as to what to do with this population. The Los Angeles Police Department in their website notes that about 40,000 gang members are registered as active gang members in the city of Los Angeles. By many different accounts and studies, it's estimated that about 10%, give or take, of those are the ones that are actually causing most of the havoc, committing the worst of crimes. So we're talking about 90% of documented gang members, most of which are young people that generally don't fall under the category of being dealt with by suppression only. My argument that I'm here to make is that they're also not just for prevention efforts. I'm here to make the statement, that we must focus on a population that needs intervention. And whether it is housed in one place or another, that the focus should not be lost, that this is a population that requires intervention. Over a century ago, child abuse cases, neglect and so forth were being dealt with by the Humane Society. Wrong place. Children were being, tried and incarcerated with adults. Wrong philosophy. It seems that we're heading back in that direction, where it's okay, to give help, to children or young people who are not yet in trouble, or to lock up the ones, that do get in trouble. Totally missing the point that when you look at the population bell curve, you got the large segment of the gang-involved population that, with intervention, they would be redeemable, they would become productive, citizens, and that we would actually be accountable, not just, to society in general, but to taxpayers and, to the philosophy of moving forward with giving our children and our young people the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm very cognizant of the idea that of all people, government should not act in desperation. Government should not react out of frustration, that we have to discipline ourselves to act responsibly, diligently, and move forward with the best intention and, more importantly, with the best information possible, so that we can make sure that we don't make mistakes. When people act in desperation or with way too much emotion, when government acts in that fashion and doesn't consider carefully what their actions may cause and the inadvertent things they may cause, in my opinion, that's the kind of things that wars are made of. When people and policymakers and government at the highest level does not move responsibly, knowledgeably, and I dare say carefully. Because unfortunately, I think the public thinks that when you use the word carefully, that's another term for take your sweet time. No, carefully means that you're properly informed, and that means that you are taking care of the issue, not just reacting to the issue. So I appreciate you reminding us of that and giving us some examples of bad decisions made in the past that have hurt communities and individuals. So once again, on item number 3, we'll hold the motion in committee pending the report from the CAO's office, and we anticipate having that in committee next week. Item number 4.
Item 4, motion Cardenas Rizar requesting that CDD, Department of Recreation and Parks, Police Department, Children, Youth and their Families, Commission on Status of Women, Cultural Affairs, Public Works, LAWA, and Port of LA report relative to which programs currently qualify within the definitions and structure of the community-based gang intervention model, and incorporating into all future RFPs and qualifications the models, definitions, and structures.
Okay. All right. This motion, can we have CDD up here? Again, your name for the record. We're on a new item. I know you've spoken more than once.
Sharon Morris, CDD.
Thank you, Sharon. Can you, because of all the departments that are addressed or spoken to in this motion, your department has more activity going on that would require your response. What's your? Can you give me in your words, on behalf of your department, what's your interpretation of what this motion is asking?
I believe what you're asking us to do is to look at both prongs of the proposal from the Community Engagement Committee, and to talk about where our programs currently fit into that model.
Mm-hmm.
And currently, we have taken a look at it. We haven't gone through that exercise yet, but as we see it, we fit into a lot of those boxes, not all of them, but yeah, our preliminary assessment is that it looks like a pretty good model to us, and something that our programs easily fit into.
Mm-hmm. Well, without question, that community-based gang intervention model, and it delineates between prong 1 and prong 2. That's I see it, and I've been working on this matter for 10 years now. I see it as perhaps the most comprehensive, if not perfect, but the most comprehensive descriptions and delineation of what intervention activities are and how they address issues or attempt to address issues, and how categorically within intervention there are different categories of activity and responsibilities. Is that model, does it fit that description?
Yeah, I believe it does.
Okay. Now, the fact that we've adopted that model, the council adopted it, the council doesn't involve itself in the minutia of the day-to-day activities of the city. Various departments and various individuals are charged with that responsibility. Yes. So that being the case, part of this motion talks about incorporating the language and or those understandings in future RFPs or RFQs, and also adhering that language into certain programs that we're funding today or implementing today, correct?
Yes.
Now, do you see any anything that you'd like to add to that might help your department, at least your department, understand how to incorporate that as described in this motion?
I think as we go through the exercise that this motion asks us for, that we may come up with some of those questions. Sure. I don't have any sitting here today. I mean, one of the questions that's asked of us quite a bit has to do with our family development networks and whether or not they serve families that are involved in gangs, impacted by gangs, whatever. We know that they do. We've never asked them to report to us specifically. You know, we generally learn when they're telling us about a specific incident that's happened, that sort of thing. We've never asked them to track it. So some of those kinds of things, we know there are changes that we would make so that we're capturing that kind of data that we're not capturing
And
now.
please remember, and you've been in this committee when I've mentioned many, many times, especially when we're asking not-for-profits, some not-for-profits were here and admitted that they don't have a boatload of cash they sit on. You know, if they miss a incoming check, that actually puts them at risk of being able to provide services for the next 30 days. If we're going to enhance, if your department, for example, is going to enhance the correspondence responsibility of the kind of reporting you just described, by the way, that's a good thing. The more we know, the more we correspond, the better we can improve our processes and the better we can understand how to not only define but adhere to better practices on the street level services. So that inherently may cost an organization time and or money. And you've heard me say in this committee, we need to learn as a city to respectfully allow them the resources that we give them to be adhered to that. Instead of just asking them, well, you know, you delineated in your RFP or through the RFQ process, and we picked you through the RFP process, and we're going to give you a $230,000 contract, and we can see that you've delineated that $230,000 or $229,000 goes directly to our field workers. Yet at the same time, we're asking that organization to correspond back with us either quarterly or monthly or semi-annually or what have you, or annually, and give us a report. That report takes time, energy, and resources and man and women power, correct?
It does.
You've heard me say in this committee, we need to learn how to allow them, give them the dollars to actually do that. Because it's the request that we're making of them.
It is. We try to make it as easy as possible, but I know that many organizations, particularly the smaller ones, find it burdensome to do. But we remind
because
them
they probably don't have bean counters on staff, or they don't have researchers on staff, or they don't have policy wonks on staff. They tend to be, especially the smaller organizations, are hands-on. The people who are working there are actually day-to-day working with the constituent.
Yes.
And that activity is very different than actually sitting down away from the constituent and actually compiling and reporting, preparing reports to, for example, CDD.
Yes.
So the reason why I'm dialoguing with you like this, please understand, I encourage the department, I expect the department to help us policymakers understand that when we give a $230,000 contract for $230,000 worth of services, we either going to expect $220,000 in services, for example, or we're going to give an additional $10,000 so they can give $230,000 in services and adhere to our requirements with that other $10,000 to be able to prepare, correspond, and report back to us because they're providing services and we need to know more.
Absolutely.
And that takes energy and resources from them.
Yes,
Okay?
absolutely.
So please understand that we expect. Okay?
Yeah.
And I use this as an example. The perfect department to use it as an example that actually is expected to provide certain resources, but is funded on top of that for their reporting requirements is the police department. We always expect them to report very well, and they do. We always expect them to know and tell us exactly what's going on, when we need to know it, et cetera, and they do. They dedicate bodies and individuals, experts, to do those kinds of reports and correspond with the street-level providers, and they do. But the funny thing is, we fund them for that 9 times out of 10.
Yes.
We're not perfect. 9 times out of 10, we do expect that, and we understand that the department's sophisticated enough, and they say, this is what we're going to do with the money. X amount goes to the services, and X amount goes to administration. But when we deal with third-party providers such as not-for-profits, all too often we expect all that, but we don't respect the fact that we need to give them money for their administrative responsibilities, certainly responsibilities that are unique to what we're requesting of them in reports. We don't do that with by and large. The flip side, 9 times out of 10, we don't provide the not-for-profits that. Police department, 9 times out of 10, we do respect and understand that when they say we're going to use this money for XYZ, by the way, X amount's going to be used for administrative. And we say, of course, that costs money.
Yes.
So understand that we expect that, not only from CDD, from all the departments that are dealing with intervention programs and when it comes to this particular motion. So with that, do you have any questions about this motion?
No.
Okay.
We will call when we have questions.
You got it. Exactly. Just don't ask for resources. Just kidding. Again, be honest with us. Let us know, if this process is in fact being hindered by something. In order for you to be effective and adhere to this process, to this motion, please let us know. Okay? You can let us know by calling my office. You can let us know by coming to committee and letting us know that way. Whatever works, certainly, especially when timing is an issue.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Is anybody here to comment on item number 4? Anybody here for public comment on item number 4? Seeing and hearing none. Public comment on item number 4 is now closed. With that, due to a lack of quorum, we'll adopt this motion and move it forward as a recommendation of the chair. Okay. That concludes the items scheduled for today's agenda. With that, is there anybody here for public comment, general public comment to this committee? I see no public comment cards filled out for general public comment. Seeing and hearing none, general public comment is now closed. With that, this committee is now adjourned.